And what's up? Welcome in GC Live Monday episode of the show. Sorry for a little late start, working through a couple little technical difficulties. Doing our best though. Hope everybody is doing well because we got plenty to hit on today, Chris. Lots going on the field over the weekend. Lots going on off the field with a big announcement today from the University of South Carolina. But first, going to tell you about our friend Clint Hammond at Movement Mortgage. That's clint.hammond.com. You can call him at his office at 803-771-6933. But as I told y'all last week, Clint said he'd prefer y'all just to hit him up on his cell phone. So 803-422-6797. That is the way you can get in touch with Clint. And Clint, obviously, as we tell you every single week, every single day, actually, if you're in the market for a new home, Clint is your guy. If you've never bought a home before, need somebody to walk you through the process, Clint can handle everything each and every step of the way. So, again, give Clint a call. Go check out his website, clinthammond.com. 803-422-6797. We're going to get into the scrimmage. We're going to get into some injury updates. And really, Chris, I didn't plan to start with this, but they hit us with a little bit of news this afternoon. Alshon Jeffery, jersey retirement. We went through this with the Clowney thing as well. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way. Jersey retirement in this case, in our modern day in 2023, means you get the big light up name up there, your number is up there, but South Carolina will still have a number one on the field. It will be, I guess, what? DQ Smith on defense.
Trey Knox on offense.
On offense. So they're not in danger. Still will have their jerseys. They're not going to have their jerseys ripped off at halftime of the Mississippi State game and get told that they can no longer have them on out there. But Chris, I mean, no brainer in my opinion. We are seeing these guys from that Spurrier just epic stretch where they just had ball player after ball player come through, go on to the NFL, high draft picks. Obviously, Clowney last year, Alshon now this year. It seems like they're checking the boxes of those guys who were just so key during that stretch for South Carolina and Steve Spurrier and company. Your initial reaction to the Alshon Jeffery news today?
I think when Alshon Jeffery, Jadeveon Clowney, Marcus Lattimore, other guys too, right? But just to start with those three, when those three were playing, you could very much sense and know that, hey, we're seeing greatness here. Like it was pretty easy to see that based on their dominant performances that they would have against really great competition. And I think it was that way with Alshon. I remember back in the days before college football got uber paranoid as a sport, when Steve Spurrier would have open preseason practices. And I'm not clamoring for 15 open practices, by the way, but Spurrier would have a bunch of open practices. And we'd just be out there watching Stephon Gilmore, who's, probably an NFL Hall of Famer at this point, Wes, and Alshon Jeffery out there battling in one-on-ones during practice. And when you saw that, and when you saw Alshon Jeffery in the games, and some of the huge plays, the meaningful plays, the amazing plays that he made, you could say, this dude is great. But I think it's always interesting to go back several years removed from it now and just kind of think back, and you're able to have some perspective about what he did and how impressive it was. And that's certainly the case with Alshon Jeffery. You see that come across and you immediately start thinking about some of the catches he made, some of the plays he made. The Alabama one, right, is obviously perhaps his most iconic, one of his most meaningful, and probably one of the most iconic plays in South Carolina history. So the guy just had an incredible career. I think it's easy to forget almost statistically what he did at South Carolina and how impressive it was. So yeah, big news and very well deserved, obviously, for Alshon.
Yeah, man. So, Chris, I think when you look at just the entirety of his career, another guy that you put in that category of chose South Carolina when he could have chose anywhere. We all know the story. Commits to Southern Cal. Um, kind of committed there, I thought at the time, out of nowhere. Like it really felt like he was a South Carolina lean. It really felt like he was going to end up at South Carolina. Commits to Southern Cal. Message boards, no different than today. Message boards are freaking out. And South Carolina really just had to stay the course with Alshon Jeffery. Went to signing day. I see people talking about Lane Kiffin in the comments. You have the whole sort of infamous comment about, he's going to be pumping gas if he ends up there. And, I think, Chris, if you kind of look at his career and how it played out, he essentially was the highly rated guy coming in, and then he proved to be that highly rated guy on the field as well. And I see y'all saying we got echo problems. That was one of the issues we were dealing with before we came on. That's why we were late. We're trying to get them fixed. It's been back and forth. So y'all bear with us on the echo a little bit. I can hear it too. That's kind of part of the reason I'm stumbling over my words there for a second. But Alshon was basically that dude as a recruit, and then he ended up being that dude as a player in college as well. And you don't always see that. And I remember people clamoring for Alshon to be on the field as a freshman. Hey, where is this guy? We've seen what he can do. You saw what he could do in practice. And, it was a little bit of a slow start as far as getting him on the field. But, one of my favorite Alshon memories watching sort of his career start to play out was that Kentucky game his freshman year. I think he scored, it's a little bit kind of blurry by now. I think he scored 3 touchdowns in that game and just really announced his sort of presence in college football. So to see him come in as the guy who had Southern Cal after him, had Tennessee after him, choose South Carolina on signing day, that's really when Carolina was building that recruiting momentum that you saw turn over onto the actual playing field as well. And make no mistake, Shane Beamer, the late, great Brad Lawing, those guys highly, highly involved in helping South Carolina land Alshon Jeffery in what was just a down to the final day recruitment. But, this was a special time for South Carolina, getting Stephon Gilmore in that class, getting Alshon Jeffery in that class. And like I said, just fighting to the end. I'd love to hear in the comments. I'd love to hear those of you who are on the YouTube chat, your favorite Alshon moments, whether that's his actual best plays, best games, moments in general. There really were just so many of those that I would dare say it's hard to break it down, especially off the top of your head. Hard to break it down into just one or just two. But the Alabama game he had, the one-handed grab where Dre Kirkpatrick is draped all over him, that's got to be up there. But one-handed grab after one-handed grab, if you look back at his career, so big, so physical. And it was just honestly, for most defensive backs, downright unfair for them to have to try to cover Alshon Jeffery. Covering Alshon one-on-one with the width of his body and his hands and ball skills was just pretty much unfair, I would say. Let's try to bring Chris back in. And Chris, what pops to mind? I'm sure the Alabama game and that catch instantly pops to mind. But if you can think of any others off the top of your head, what were some of your favorite Alshon moments?
Wes, the one play is coming to mind. Wasn't it against the Citadel, the one-handed grab in the back? That was an incredible play. He had a big game against Auburn, I remember. The Alabama one is the one that's just, people forget about the other touchdown he had. I mean, obviously, goes without saying, Stephen Garcia kind of had the game of his life against Alabama. So Alshon had the other touchdown in that game that was, a great, just kind of made it look easy. I mean, just got himself pretty open, ran a great route, caught the football. The other one, Drake Kirkpatrick, who, by the way, Drake Kirkpatrick now has a son, Wes, that's a college football prospect. So we continue to get older and older as we cover all this stuff. But, yeah, I mean, that was the one. I saw a photo today, Wes, of Alshon making that one-handed catch. And a lot of the photos, you see a very exasperated Nick Saban in the background of that picture. If you're watching the video or a bunch of photos of it, I actually saw one today with Kirby Smart in the background, also looking a bit puzzled at how exactly Alshon Jeffery was able to pull that off. So he was just a guy that kind of looked superhuman at times, with some of the stuff he did. Every All-American team you could think of, he was on it. All the All-SEC teams. Remember the Sports Illustrated issue that came out that had Alshon Jeffery on it. He just made so many plays, man. So big day for him. It's going to be when he ends up getting, rightfully so, when he ends up getting that jersey retired.
Yeah, man, and I'm really excited for him. Well deserved, well earned, and I mean, yeah. So somebody else mentioned the touchdown catch against Clemson, in 2011. Yeah, that had a very special celebration at the end of it. He is so all right. The old heads, and I mean the older. Chris and I are old heads now too. The older old heads may disagree. I'm sure they'll add in. I don't have memories of like Sterling Sharp, right? You go back Robert Brooks. I mean, it's hard to compare receivers when you physically did not see it yourself. So let's just sort of put that to the side. Let's go like the recruiting online era at South Carolina. There's a very strong, I would say, battle to be had here. If you're a little bit older than the Alshon era, to me, I've always said Sidney Rice and Alshon Jeffery for best receiver at South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
1A, 1B, and I don't know who's A. Some people will tell you, oh, it has to be one or it has to be the other. I don't buy that. I think it's too close for it to be, oh, it has to be this guy.
Yeah, man. There's a little bit, and what I'm about to say does not discount Alshon at all, but there's a little bit, I think, of recency bias, right? He came after Sidney. The plays are a little bit more recent. There's some more probably iconic plays, maybe some more meaningful plays. But, man, some of the stuff Sidney Rice did, some of the catches that he made were tremendous. And then, you go look at what he did in the pros, and it kind of validated all that as well. And Alshon had a good stretch in the pros as well, of course. But, man, Sidney Rice was so good. And I remember specifically, watching him at South Carolina. And I can say now, again, with the benefit of hindsight and perspective, looking back live when Sidney Rice was playing, I viewed it at that time in a very similar way to how I viewed when we were watching Alshon Jeffery play. And then now that we've seen them both and we've had some time pass, for me, they are pretty similar. I would have to, for me to come up with what I think the answer is on who was the best, I would really have to go back. I'd probably have to go watch some old games. I would have to go back and look at the record books, the statistics. and maybe I could kind of figure out, okay, here's who I think is the best. But right here, just sitting here, it's hard for me to come up with an answer.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd probably change your mind 5 times along the way too. Like it is so close. But for me personally, just my opinion. And again, I'm just sticking. Let's go like Holtz era forward, like modern-ish, I guess you'd say. Alshon and Sydney are my 1A and my 1B. Then I've got a little separation, and that's when I get into late great Kenny McKinley, although hard to compare, even though they played the same position, completely different what they brought to the table, right? I don't have an order here. I'm just throwing names. But my next group, late great Kenny McKinley, Pharaoh Cooper,
Pharaoh,
Debo, and you have caveats to all these guys. Sydney only got 2 years. Kenny was more of a just played the position so high level for so long at South Carolina, consistently stuffing the stat sheet. Smaller guy, obviously, slot receiver, different style player. Pharaoh, one of the most versatile guys to ever play at South Carolina. Debo, the injury history kept him from just exploding like he would have. So you got little things that kind of move you around. The guy who doesn't have the body of work yet that we could be sitting here talking about, a guy we're going to talk about here in a second, Juice Wells. Frankly, I mean, you look what he did last year. He's going to be up there with all of them by the end. And next guy in that group, as Craig points out, Brian Edwards.
Cool. Some good ones, man. Some really good ones. All different players. You could probably say that out of all those, Rice and Jeffery were the closest to each other in terms of play style, skill set. Even then, not really the same. You know, I mean, you got some differences there. Who is the most physically talented, Wes? You could take that one in a different way too, right? Not even like who's the best, who's the most productive, who's the most physically talented. The way that you look at the talent and skill set of a Jeffery Rice type versus like Debo, out of the guys you listed, I think Debo Samuel is in the top 3 at worst, just because he is so versatile. And I think his talent level, like this is a guy who went to the NFL and they're like, oh, he can carry the football. Let's make him kind of a pseudo running back. We saw what he did in the kick return game. You know, some added value. So it's just we could talk on these forever and come up with a lot of different questions to get to the heart of the matter of who was the best receiver. You know, even though I have it as a Rice Jeffery thing in my mind, you bring up some of these other guys, and then I start scratching my head going, wait a minute, do they actually fit into the equation here and where?
Yeah, and I do sort of hate we gotta, and I'm doing it, but I hate we gotta compare everybody in sports, right? Like we're always like, well, hey, let's list them, let's put them in order, and I don't want to diminish what anybody else has done by any means, but I still, even as much as I think through it in my mind, and let's see, Lynn's bringing up Sterling Sharp. Yeah, again, I don't have memories of watching Sterling Sharp. For people who saw him as well and have the memories of it the same way you do an Alshon or a Sydney, you probably have him right up there with those guys in your mind. In my, last 23, 25 years or so, those are my 1A and 1B, or Sydney Rice, Alshon Jeffery. Debo, like you said, immense talent. The injuries just kept him from having the career he absolutely would have had. All those guys are so special in their own rights, and different players. Then you add in, somebody said Bruce Ellington. I think right after that group, I throw in a Bruce Ellington. I throw in a, there were other guys. Ace Sanders was really, really good. There's a whole nother list of guys, Torrey Gurley, that you can start to name that did a lot of good things for South Carolina at that wide receiver position. But I think just a reminder, too, again, Chris, we get caught up as a whole, the football viewing world, wide receiver, we get caught up. Oh, what does this guy run in the 40? How big is he? Blah, 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 blah. Who can go get the football? Alshon Jeffery was not outrunning you in a 40-yard dash. We need to confirm this story for once and for all when we talk to Alshon about how much he could bench press when he arrived at South Carolina, because I remember hearing it was not much. But this dude just had the ball skills. He knew how to Cam points it out perfectly. He was boxing you out. He was using his body, but he was tracking the football. Him and Sydney. They tracked the football while running downfield, looking up into the stadium lights, dude draping on them, running, heads bobbing. They tracked the football better than like anybody I've ever seen at South Carolina. And to me, that was the difference. And then, of course, having the hands to be able to bring it in at the end.
Yeah, it is interesting that two of the best guys on this list, or probably Wes Moore, right? Like Deebo Samuel, athletically, in terms of what he put up testing, he had some numbers, right? But Kenny McKinley was a high school quarterback and very, very athletic. Was he in like somebody categorized as a freak? No. Pharaoh Cooper, I mean, y'all seen the way Pharaoh runs, right? I mean, it does not look super, smooth, but they just get the job done. And so I think there's yeah, that's right. When you're a receiver, it's great to have physical traits. Like somebody brought up Shaq Rowland, like the way he could run, his smoothness, his natural ability, like he had tons of traits. And those are good things to have too. Those make it easier, but it's not all you need. So just understanding how to run routes and really, like you said, with Jeffrey, with Rice, the biggest thing was just the ball skills. They just had an ability to get open, to make themselves open. And even if they weren't open, to catch the football, the catch radius, the ball skills were just absolutely off the charts.
No doubt, man. So let's move it on to the scrimmage, and let's get into that a little bit. Not an open scrimmage, so kind of got to pull from here, pull from there, pull from what the coaches say, pull from what you can hear, pull from what they post with little snippets of Omega Blake making a big play in the scrimmage, and tie it all together as best we can. And we're going to do that. But first, going to tell you about our friends at Liberty Tax. Overcome your taxiety, 803-462-5576. And Chris Clark, you have already headed off any potential next year taxiety really in its tracks. So why don't you tell the people real quick about your experience with Larry and his team at Liberty Tax?
Yeah, no taxiety whatsoever. Confirm, Wes. You are absolutely correct. Wanted to make sure that I didn't get into tax season in 2024. And I'm worried, have I done my estimated tax payments? If you're someone out there who does some 1099 work, if you have a business of your own, if you have a side business, sometimes you might have estimated tax payments. You want to make sure that you're on top of those. Or if you're just a W-2 employee, whatever your tax situation is, you want to make sure that you have a plan. And so I wanted to make sure that that's what my family did. So we're there. No taxiety. Met with Larry. We followed up with him via phone, via email several times already. He's all over it. We're all over it. No taxiety. Super happy with Larry and his team at Liberty Tax. And now we will be well prepared going into the tax season in 2024, ready to go.
Yeah, man, certainly appreciate Larry and his entire team over there. Again, 3 convenient locations in the greater Columbia area. Give them a shout, 803-462-5576. Scrimmage time, man. Scrimmage number 1. We talked about this on 107.5. It always brings, hey, this side of the ball looked really good. That means you're worried about this side of the ball. You're making, you're protecting the ball, but what about creating turnovers? You're running the ball, but what about stopping the run? Very, very difficult to discern what it means for your team this time of year. I do think what you look for, what you're sort of trying to discover, what do we have as far as individuals go? Who are the individuals that step up? Who are the individuals that are avoiding mistakes and errors? Who are the individuals that have kind of done everything asked of them? I thought it was interesting, Chris. Let's dive into a position group we've talked about quite a bit. Offensive line. I believe Lonnie Teasley, did he identify scrimmage 1 to you in the preseason, or was that scrimmage 2 he kind of circled?
Scrimmage 2. Scrimmage 2.
So one out of 2 is out of the way. We're halfway there. Beamer spoke after the scrimmage, said, look, we're starting to get a better idea. We're going to obviously review the film. He's talking right after the scrimmage itself. Wouldn't have had a chance you wouldn't really know. You can't watch all 22 spots that are on the field. So you really have to dive in, review the film, and then go from there. However, he did say not sure we'd know who our top 5 are right now, but we're starting to figure that out. I think you want to talk about goals for the next 5 days, for the 5 to 6 days for this program, Chris. After they take what they learned on Saturday, implement corrections this week, roll the guys back out there this next Saturday, and then review it on Sunday, I think you really want to start to have an idea at the very least. Hey, here are the 5 we're rolling with. Could it change again during the season? Of course. Is it still going to be ongoing? Of course. But here are the 5 we're going to say, you've been the best so far. Let's gel this group together, and let's go see what happens against the Tar Heels and then adjust from there.
Yeah, like you said, I think it's a great point that it can change. Remember, what was that, Wes? The 2019 game, South Carolina had its starting 5, and then, Hank Manos was the starting center in that game, and then that changes week 2, and then that's kind of it for the rest of the year. So you can see things like that happening. Rotation guys, I think, can change throughout the year. You might have, of course, an injury during the year. So a lot of different things can happen that could precipitate a change in either the rotation or just in your starting 5. But I think generally, I think you want to have had, Wes, behind the scenes. This staff is probably formulating, in my mind, an idea, based on what have they seen through. How many practices are we through, Wes? 7, 8, something like that.
We were 8 on Saturday, I think.
Yeah, so it's first scrimmage, and then that was the 8th practice overall. So you've had 8 practices, not all of them in pads, but you've had your spring, you've had your summer, you've had 8 practices, you've had 1 scrimmage. Things are probably narrowing down somewhat. I would imagine you've got 2 to 3 spots where you feel pretty set on a direction, and then there's probably a couple other that you're still wondering about. This is going to be a big week of practice for the players. The next scrimmage, maybe there's a big overarching change. Maybe it's just a confirmation of kind of what the coaching staff is thinking. But I think particularly at left tackle and right tackle, 2 of the spots that we've talked about plenty, these next few days, and including scrimmage, the second scrimmage, those are probably the most important. These next few days are critical for those 2 spots to get those set, to feel pretty good about the direction you may be going. Of course, leaving some room for those things to potentially alter and shift during the year, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, man. And I think if you look at this group, I do continue just to go to that tackle spot. Did you notice that once again, and we'll sort of circle this into the injuries as well, but Beamer brought up Case and Henry. And, it was, hey, this is a guy who has been a little bit limited in the 11-on-11 stuff, was held out of the scrimmage, has been held out of some of the stuff in practice, but it's cleared to do other things. He's not just kind of on the sideline doing nothing. They've brought him along. It catches my attention, though, when a coach just kind of brings a guy up. And he really didn't bring up many guys specifically when talking about the offensive line. That's kind of been a trend, not naming a bunch of the guys. And then he brings up Casey Henry, brought up Jackson Hughes as well, who I think that's not been talked about much, but he's actually coming off of, an off-season, an injury from last year as well. So all those guys have been kind of, you want to get them to 100% before you just throw them back out there. But is it week 1? Is it week 4? Is it week 10? I don't know. It certainly just feels like Casey Henry is a guy they think will help them at some point, if you kind of read between the lines with what both you hear a little bit behind the scenes and what they're saying publicly.
Well, and so, Wes, is he one of those guys that is maybe a prime candidate to step in, maybe not game 1, but maybe game 2 or later, whether it's a rotation player? Maybe there might be situations on the offensive line where, there's a midseason shift, a tweak. Maybe a guy's not playing well. Maybe there's an injury. That's why you want to have most offensive line coaches, including Lonnie Teasley, talk about having at least 8 guys that you feel good about. Going back to last season, what did we see? We saw Ja'Kai Moore kick inside to guard, Jalen Nichols to left tackle. That wasn't something that happened at the beginning of the year. That happened for the Florida game. It went poorly for the Florida game, but then again, everything did. That was the combination that they rode at the end of the season, and that was one of the components. There were many that had USC play its best ball, down the stretch. So Henry, I do have to wonder with Casey Henry, there's a few factors at play. Number one, he's still very inexperienced. So that's one thing. I mean, this is a guy who's a redshirt freshman. He got a little bit of run last year as a true freshman at left tackle, and he could play left or right tackle this year. He's gotten reps at both. The other thing is he's a young player who's coming off injury. So he missed the whole spring. Of course, he was limited during the summer. I remember coming into preseason camp, Shane Beamer noted that he was 85%, according to what Henry was saying. And obviously, he has not been fully and completely released to do absolutely everything in practice. So those factors at play, they do make you wonder. Yes, he's talented. He's a big, athletic guy who has a nasty streak. He's got a lot of potential. But for the purposes of the beginning of the year, it does make me wonder a little bit, Wes, is he going to be ready to step in and play big snaps immediately? Maybe. But with one scrimmage down and him still being on, trying to get back on track to be fully back, I just wonder if we need to temper the expectations a little bit in terms of game 1 impact.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, played very, very little, like you said, last year. The other side of the coin is Sidney Fugar is one of your options. Transferred in this past offseason, went through spring at least, but has not played at the SEC level. Tyshawn Wanamaker is a guy who, has lost a little bit of weight this offseason and is in a situation where, he's the most experienced guy out of the bunch. So, I don't know. There's not the perfect answer at those tackle spots, I feel like right now. But I think if you're Carolina, you hope that you can kind of bring them along and then that they can all gel together and that you can bring along these young guys while you're at it. Trayvon Ball inside, Marquis Anderson inside, Tree Babalade outside. Young, talented guys. You always tell these kids in recruiting, hey, man, you're going to have a chance. You're going to have a chance to play early. On the offensive line, that doesn't always happen. We know that. In this case, with at least part of those guys, it is absolutely going to happen. So I think it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out, how that changes from week to week. In a perfect world, you can bring some of those guys along as the season progresses. Maybe it's not counting on a Casey Henry week 1 to just run out there and go play coming off an injury with very little experience. Maybe it's, let's work him in. Let's get a big lead, work him in against Furman, bring some of these guys along, work Tree in against Furman, and kind of, I think, Chris, the best teams kind of build their depth as a season progresses because you're going to test your depth with injuries. That's a part of it. But you can build your depth too if you can get some leads. And I know we shouldn't be getting ahead of North Carolina, but look at this. Look at the first 4 games here, man. You got a tough North Carolina team, which, by the way, is top 25 right now. By I think most of the polls that have come out. You've got Georgia, week 3. You got a Mississippi State team that I think none of us even know what to expect from in week 4. You better get up big on Furman, right?
Yeah, I don't. The coaching staff is probably not in any position where they can even think about how are we going to get some of these young guys integrated with some playing time. But Furman's really the only one that you could realistically count on, right? And of course, none of the coaches would say that publicly. Even Furman West, I think, is in the top 10 of the FCS. So, of course, the Gamecocks absolutely never catch a scheduling break. They do not have Georgia's 2023 schedule, which is, has some SEC games, but it's a cakewalk comparatively to South Carolina. So, I mean, look, this is something you got to figure out. And we've been talking about the offensive line a good bit. I think the fans are talking about it a decent amount. I'm a little bit surprised not more, given the circumstances. They'll definitely be talking about it the first time USC gets stuffed on 3rd and 1, the first sack, first 3 and out. It'll be more of a conversation, and those things will happen, at some point during the season. But this is not one. It's a great point. It's not something that you can kind of feel out and feel your way through the first 3 or 4 games of the season, because if you don't get it figured out, your record is going to reflect that, I think, in the early part of the year.
No doubt. Still Curtin asking, is Wanamaker more of a tackle or guard? I would say more of a tackle all the way. Chris, let me throw this one out there. And if Beamer or anybody catches word of this, I'm just making this up. This is not me throwing a secret plan out there. Literally just a thought that has crossed my mind. I would put Wanamaker on short yardage as an additional tight end, like we've seen them use guys in the past.
Is this officially a crusade of yours, Wes, or is this?
Yes. Add this to my list.
Okay.
Wanamaker as extra tackle, extra tight end. The Trey Jones, Cody Gibson back in the day, that role, book it. I think you should do that if you're Carolina. Okay. But so Chris, injury-wise, we had another fun Gamecock freak out, 48 hours worth. Trey Knox banged up on Thursday. Juice Wells missing in action on Friday. This is the time of the year injuries are going to start to happen. So is what it is. Knox got a little bit of a scare, lower body injury, and they expect him back beginning of this week. We'll see. I still think, Chris, they'll probably ease him back in anytime you have something, a scare like that. Ease him back in. Juice Wells is going to be a little bit more, I think, of something where you're monitoring him, trying to bring him along, trying to rehab him along going into week 1. They're optimistic he'll be back for game 1. Juice Wells is one of the most driven guys on this roster, I think. I do think when Beamer says, I know how he's going to attack that, he's that's a literal thing. Like this guy is driven to play the game of football. So not necessarily ideal news by any means. I'm not trying to just sugarcoat it, but certainly not near as bad as it could have been when you first hear, hey, Trey Knox, Juice Wells are missing from practice on Friday.
Yeah, there's some other programs, Wes, that have sent out news releases or had coach press conferences where they're talking about a player being gone for the year before game 1. And that's not, fortunately, what South Carolina is looking at right now. The Knox freak out is a funny word. The Knox one is kind of illustrates the nature now of social media and the collective freak out, because there wasn't any real indication that it may have been serious. I mean, most people who even observed it was like, oh, that didn't look that bad. But word comes out, and then immediately we go from, hey, a guy got banged up playing football in practice, to, well, he's probably done for the year, because it might have been his knee. I get it, especially when, Trey Knox is a new player. He's expected to have a big impact. People are hungry. People are excited. So I get it. The Juice Wells one, I get it, because that is certainly more than the Trey Knox one. There's levels to these things, and that one is more. You pointed this out earlier today on the GC Takeover Hour 107.5 The Game. The Juice Wells one didn't he's running around in practice and doing everything, and he was just a little minor. Like Beamer said, they're optimistic of game one. It is not a guarantee, right? So that one is more, I guess you could say, alarming. But I think Beamer rightfully was pointing out, hey, guys are going to get banged up. There's going to be things in the offseason. There's going to be things during the season. You got to still roll the ball out there. You got to field a football team. You're going to play. Guys are going to play hurt. Sometimes, heck, guys are going to play injured. Mm-hmm. And I'm with you, Wes. Everything that we've heard, maybe it's a tight timeline, but, man, sitting here right now on August 14th, you got to feel like Juice Wells and everybody around South Carolina is going to do everything possible to get him out there for game one.
Yeah, and I ain't betting against 3, to be honest with you. And here's the thing. Without getting into too much detail, and to respect everybody involved, I do think this was the best scenario based on what happened for everybody involved. For Juice Wells, long term, for Juice Wells this season, for the football team. Sometimes you got to just shut a guy down in order to get him back to 100%, as opposed to just going out there trying to sort of, work through it. And then what are you doing? You're playing injured all season long. That's not good for 3. That's not good for Carolina. That's not good for his draft stock. That's not good for anybody. So I tend to think best case scenario here, get Juice Wells back at as close to 100% as possible, and put him in a position to succeed, and thus put the offense in a position to succeed as well. Still very few, I would say, specific details from the scrimmage, Chris, as we move on to that a little bit. They did post the clip of Omega Blake making a nice catch and run. He's a guy, I think, if you look at who's like been on the field a good bit more with Juice not out there, there's some guys, Omega Blake, Peyton Mangrum, Nick Harbor, those are the guys that it seems like kind of slot up into that spot that Juice specifically plays, like his wide receiver spot. Now, if you look at Juice not being there, who becomes the primary target on this offense, I think that's when your attention goes to like an Xavier Luedecke, an Amari Brown. There's guys that are going to have a chance to get more balls, I think. But as far as sort of slotting right up into that spot and taking away his snaps in practice, Beamer mostly mentioned Harbor and Omega Blake, but we have seen out there at practice in the portions we've been at where Peyton Mangrum, the former walk-on, very successful special teams performer, great player in his own right, man, for a guy that came in as a walk-on. He's taken some of those reps in practice away as well.
We've seen, Wes, some Joseph Morris with the 2s, another former walk-on. With the 2s and 3s, Landon Sampson working in there. So, yeah, they've been rotating a lot of guys to see what they can do. I had a question today on the Insiders Forum on Gamecock Central about, what the rotation would look like with Juice, without Juice. And I think really what it comes down to, Wes, is once you get past the 3 starters that are locked in, those being Luedecke, Marion Brown, Juice Wells, who are those next 3? And it seems to be, to me, kind of still an ongoing question. I think Omega Blake did have a nice day in the scrimmage the other day. Everybody probably saw the social media clip where, Dowell Loggins and Spencer Rattler and Justin Stepp were all super excited for him making a play. So he seemed to make some strides. He's someone that's always had a good bit of physical ability. It's just been about being consistent for him and kind of putting it together. Not to say that that's fully happened yet, but there are some good signs there. Mangrum is someone who, the book on him out of high school, Wes, is that, he didn't have absolutely elite physical traits, but was just a real smart player, really good route runner. And I think we've seen that in practice too. It seems to still be kind of open-ended as to who those next three will be. But we saw last year, again, go back to the depth chart, all the oars with Jalen Brooks and Josh Vann. We saw them rotate in a good amount of guys. I think this year, your next 2 to 3 guys behind your starters are a little bit more unsettled. You might even feel better about your starters this year with the new offense, kind of coupling those two together. You might not feel as good at this point about your next rotational guys. I'm not sure. I haven't really heard anything that gives me the sense of these guys have definitely 100% won rotation spots. You may disagree. Maybe you've heard something a little different there.
No, I'm with you, man. I'll tell you, it's been a little quiet for some guys. Still early, but I think you want to start to hear. You kind of are. To me, it's like, all right, you got the guys who have been here for, and some of them are former walk-ons, but you got the guys who have been here for a little bit. You got Omega Blake, not a veteran by any means, but has been, around the program for a couple of years now. Sampson was in the program last year, obviously. Versus how quickly do some of these freshmen start to emerge. It's been relatively quiet, I would say. I'm not saying this is a negative thing, but it's been relatively quiet around Eddie Lewis this preseason camp. So, I would think that's a guy that you want to kind of, if especially if Juice is not in practice, we know that much, take advantage and, start to step up. I had Eddie Lou as kind of the fourth guy.
Yep.
Like coming into the year. Like and really is versatile enough. He could truly be the fourth guy, no matter who came off the field. We heard a lot about Elijah Caldwell during the summer. I even predicted he'd be like the talk of camp. It's been a little bit quiet with him. Can he, as camp goes on, get some more reps out there? Again, we're not watching practice, but at least from what we saw in the 11-on-11s, Harbor is a guy, it seemed like, again, some of this is from injuries, but we didn't see him in that kind of rotation the first time we were out there, but then we've started to see Nick out there a little bit more, at least in that 11-on-11, or it was against Air. There's 11 guys out there. There wasn't even the defense out there, but on Friday, we saw Harbor out there in that rotation. So, can the younger guys start to push for that time? And is that something I'd imagine, man, it's going to be ongoing as the year progresses, as the year goes on. It's going to be some guys week 1. It'll be different guys by week 10. It always is. And how much is it about, hey, if I'm Justin Stepp, I trust this guy right now over my true freshman who's never played.
Yep.
I wouldn't be surprised. Dude, Peyton Mangrum's probably going to be in that rotation week 1. Like, you can call him, oh, he's a former walk-on, but he's earned the trust of the staff. So you're going to be in a close, tight football game. This is not Eastern Illinois where, no offense to those guys. We had their coach on our show. I love that guy. He was awesome. That's one of the worst opponents South Carolina has ever played in modern day. You could roll your guys out there and just let them make mistakes and then learn from the mistakes, right?
Yeah.
In this case, you can't afford the mistakes.
You can't, and that's a big part of it. Elijah Call, and that could be, Wes, the reason why, in the summer you hear a good bit of buzz about Elijah Caldwell. and you hear a good bit of buzz about Nicholas Harbor for the reasons you would expect. He's huge. He can really run. It's like, yeah, then you get into camp, the pads come on. There's a learning curve, for most freshmen. Not all of them come in and immediately are just, this guy's the best player on the field. That happens at some positions with some guys, but that's probably more atypical. I think, Wes, let's say that Juice and Amarian Brown and Xavier Legette just don't exist for some reason. And who is kind of the next three up? This is tell me if I'm wrong. This is how I think about the next three. Peyton Mangum's in there. Eddie Lewis, because he could play outside or inside. And then I might go Omega Blake right now based on, kind of recent practices. Not a super experienced player, but Peyton Mangum has some experience. Eddie Lewis has plenty of college football experience, not SEC experience. But he's played ball at Rutgers. He's played JUCO ball. He's played at Memphis. So he's got a good bit of seasoning to him. So right now, if you kind of had to handicap it, that might be my next three, subject to change throughout the year. Subject to change tomorrow, probably.
I think I'm with you, man. I mean, then that next group, that's maybe when you start, I think Landon Sampson's in that next group. Yep. You mentioned Joseph Morris has been in there in the conversation. That's when I think you start to add the freshmen, Nick Harbor, Elijah Caldwell. They start mixing up in there. And like you said, practice to practice, generally your 2s and 3s, there's going to be a lot of shuffling in and out. We're about out of time, y'all. Going to hit a couple questions. Quantrell Knows says, what are the odds Josh Simon becomes their established number 2 option in the passing game? It's a great question. I mean, I don't know statistically if he'll be the number 2 option. I think everybody expects Legette to have a great year. I think Amarian Brown's going to have a good year. Little known fact, Amarian Brown has put on more strength and weight than he has at any point in his career while maintaining his speed. So, I think he's a guy. All three of those guys, the 2 of them and Juice, should have big years. Is Josh Simon, is Trey Knox going to also factor into the passing game a ton? Absolutely. God Loves Comics in our chat room says Knox and Simon on the field together. I agree 100%. You're going to see a bunch of those guys. I mean, Josh Simon's a grown man. So we all have talked about Trey Knox. We've tried to give Josh Simon the love here on this show too. Both those guys, man, are going to have a massive year. So yeah, I'm with all of you. Final question here, Chris. I don't really get caught up in polls. They are borderline meaningless, in my opinion, except for giving us something to talk about and giving fans something to talk about. Preseason AP poll, top 25 out today. It sort of falls in line with a lot of the other polls that have been coming out. North Carolina, 21 in the country. South Carolina falls into the dreaded others receiving votes category. Counted up, they are 27th in the country. I'll tell you in a second why. I think this is perfect for South Carolina. Chris, what were your immediate thoughts to this? Surprised at all?
Not surprised. Mac Brown is now scrambling for content, Wes, because he's losing ground with his campaign of everybody's picking South Carolina. The line in Vegas for the game itself has continued to just inch a little bit more towards North Carolina. A little bit more. This poll comes out. So Mac Brown's reading it and he's throwing stuff in his office right now. I can't use the motivational ploy, right? South Carolina, on the other hand, with Spencer Rattler, with Shane Beamer, they now have Drake May getting all the love over Spencer Rattler. They now have, they got North Carolina ranked ahead of you. They've now got the Vegas line. They have all sorts of material and content to feature heading into this game as motivation, if any was needed.
I wish we had some sound effects right now. You could hit the cha-ching button because, yeah, this is perfect because you're a good enough team. There's enough respect. I mean, you're right outside of the top 25. Whoever wins this game will be sitting probably number 20 or higher in the country because North Carolina is at 21 right now. So you would think inch up with a win over a borderline top 25 team. If South Carolina wins, you would think they would at least replace North Carolina as 21st, bump up in there. So this is perfect. But this program, man, they have done their best. So far, it feels like when they can play that sort of back against the wall card a little bit, and it's a team that's just going to be difficult. I see everybody being all over the board on what the expectations for this team should be, including Shane Beamer constantly telling us how many freshmen are going to play. But you also have Spencer Rattler, Juice Wells, and a host of other guys who can make plays. So what wins out? I don't know. I also have a theory, Chris. All the Vegas analytics, algorithms, however they do this stuff these days, they always are a tick low on South Carolina, at least the last 2 years under Shane Beamer. Do you think they fail to throw in that there are three sides of the game? South Carolina special teams, and maybe I'm dead wrong. Maybe that's all computed in there as well. Maybe I'm completely off. How many South Carolina games that if there were no special teams involved and you just said offense and defense head to head, how different is their record through 2 years? It would be scary. We'd be having a much different conversation right now.
No, they've been honestly, like, I make fun of Auburn for being a weird, and they are objectively a weird football program and place and athletics department. This has been one of the weirdest football teams in the country the past 2 years. They really have. They've been very bad. And Shane Beamer said embarrassingly bad the past 2 years, turning the football over, right? On the flip side, they've been one of the best teams in the country at creating turnovers, despite the defense not being dominant by any means. Sometimes those two work hand in hand, right? Like, you got a great defense and you create turnovers. They haven't been a dominant defense, but they've been great in the turnover department. They've also been great both years, particularly last year, on special teams. And they've also been very up and down. Here's a win against a team that you probably don't have any business beating. Here's a loss against a team that you probably should beat. And then a bunch of toss-ups in between. So probably hard to peg. The computers probably don't like them. Vegas probably doesn't like them. I think if you're South Carolina, if you're Shane Beamer, you would love more consistency this year, as long as that translates, of course, into wins. History shows, and the schedule shows, Wes, with how difficult the schedule is, it'll probably be a roller coaster. It'll probably be another really interesting year with a bunch of ups and a bunch of downs.
No doubt, man. It's been fun. I'll say that. It's been fun to cover, fun to follow, fun for the fans, ups, downs, everything in between, some great wins, some tough losses, more to come. If you're Carolina, you're hoping a few more of those ups, a few fewer of those downs. But Chris, before we get out of here, man, have you been rocking your Birddogs lately?
Oh, was down at IOP down in Charleston the other day, Wes. It was approximately 250 degrees down there. We were at a concert at the Windham. And I said, you know what? I'm taking my Birddogs. I rocked, listen to this, the Birddogs shorts and the shirt. If you're going to be out in the sun sweating, might as well be cool and comfortable. It was still hot. It helped me out a lot, though.
Dude, the Birddogs are known for their shorts.
Yeah.
That shirt
underrated.
Is one of the most well-fitting, comfortable shirts legitimately that I have ever owned.
I totally agree.
I was sitting there trying to figure out how to trick them into sending me more shirts. Like that shirt is nice, dude. Aren't they a shorts company originally? Like, I've always heard Birddogs shorts.
Yes,
but
they
that
are.
polo shirt, man. Woo.
Yeah. Thing was super nice. That's why, I mean, for me, yeah, I mean, we got the shirt and I was like, oh, cool, a shirt. I didn't even try it on for a little while because I was just so in love with the shorts. And then I finally put it on. I was like, oh, how about this? This is nice. It's fantastic. So I was rocking the whole, if you saw me in Isle of Palms Saturday night, entire Birddogs get up. And it was awesome.
You were a Birddogs influencer.
That's right.
On Saturday. By the way, birddogs.com/Gamecock Central. If you're going to get one more trip to the beach yourself, they actually have bathing suits as well. But go to birddogs.com/Gamecocks or just put Gamecocks in their promo code and you will get a free hat with purchase. But I'm telling you, buy the shirt. Man, that thing is comfortable. I'm going to go work on getting them to send me another one. But, Chris, we're out of time, man. We got to get back to Gamecock Central, get back to content, and get back to planning this kickoff party. Hope to see all of you there. We are very, very low on tickets. So if you want to meet current South Carolina football players, get a VIP ticket now. If you're not doing the VIP thing, we'd still love to have you out there for the non-VIP concert and stage portion of the day. We're excited. That part is free. The non-VIP part is free. So if you don't want to spend the money, come on out, still hang out, enjoy some food, some drink, some Gamecocks, some great music, some great guests on stage. It is going to be awesome. We're pumped. It's fun every year. Year 3, Gamecock Central Kickoff Party, still hands brewing. Chris, closing thoughts?
I have one closing thought, and it's a shout out for our guy, Bake Wes, on the YouTube channel. He first gives us a shout out. Appreciate you. He also wants to know if there's a deal to join Gamecock Central. Wes, I'm feeling charitable. How about we hook up our guy Bake? Email me, Clark, CLARK, at GamecockCentral.com. Right now, honestly, I don't think we have a deal, Wes. I'm going to create one for Bake. I will hook it up because you have asked twice in the chat about a deal to join Gamecock Central, and we would love to have you and appreciate it.
I think you emailed me today too, by the way, so I have not emailed Bake back. So he's asked 3 times, so we're going to take care of it. Hey, Chris, what if the first 5 people who email you should get that deal?
I don't know, Wes. That's pretty. Yep, I'm feeling good. 5 people. Yeah,
if you're not already a subscriber, we'll find a deal for you.
Yep. Clark at GamecockCentral.com. Bake and 4 others. Hit me up. I'll create something just for y'all to join.
Chris is a magician. We got no deals. He's going to make one up as he goes. He's Chris. I'm Wes. Appreciate y'all. Enjoyed this show. A lot to talk about. A lot to dive into. So it was fun. We'll be back very, very soon. Mike Uva will be on tomorrow night, talking Tuesdays with Mike Uva. We'll be back on Wednesday as well. Hope y'all have a good one.